June Kim stared out the viewing port as the human ship approached the massive Heron space station. The structure spun slowly against the backdrop of unfamiliar stars, its curved arms glowing with blue-green lights. After 6 months of travel, they had finally arrived at humanity's first official diplomatic post in alien territory. "Nervous?" asked Captain Park, stopping beside him. "A little," Joan admitted. 4 years of xenobiology training, and I still don't know what to expect." "Just remember why they picked you," Park said, patting his shoulder. "Best adaptation specialist on Earth. Quick thinker. Calm under pressure." June nodded, though his stomach twisted with doubt. Earth had only learned about alien life 3 years ago, when the Heron Confederacy ships appeared in orbit. Everyone expected war or conquest. Instead, the aliens offered trade and knowledge. They seemed friendly, even helpful. But June had studied enough Earth history to know that friendly contact between advanced and less advanced civilizations rarely ended well for the less advanced group. The ship docked with a gentle bump. June grabbed his bag and joined the small human team at the airlock. There were 12 of them, scientists, diplomats, and cultural specialists, selected to represent Earth in this first long-term mission. Ambassador Lee gave them a final nod. "Remember, we're guests here. Their technology is hundreds of years ahead of ours. Their confederacy includes 28 species across 64 star systems. We're the newcomers. Be respectful, be observant, and be careful." The airlock hissed open, revealing a reception area filled with aliens of different shapes and colors. Most were Heron, tall, blue-skinned humanoids with 4 fingers on each hand and smooth, hairless heads. Their eyes were large and silver, with horizontal pupils like a goat's. One Heron stepped forward, her skin a deeper blue than the others. Silver markings ran down her neck and disappeared into her uniform collar. According to June's briefing materials, these markings showed high social rank. "I am Senior Cultural Officer Neri," she said in perfect English. "Welcome to Station 479 of the Heron Confederacy." Her voice had an odd musical quality, like she was half singing the words. Ambassador Lee bowed slightly. "Thank you for your welcome. We are honored to be here." Neri's silver eyes scanned the human group, stopping when she reached June. "You must be the biological adaptation specialist," she said. Her mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," June said, stepping forward. "June Kim, xenobiology, and human adaptation specialist." Neri looked him up and down, then extended one long blue finger and poked him hard in the chest. "Small," she said. "Smaller than your images suggested." June blinked in surprise, not sure how to respond to being poked. He looked at Ambassador Lee, who gave a tiny head shake. "Message received. Don't make a fuss." "I'll be your liaison officer," Neri continued, turning away without waiting for June's response. "Your species will require significant guidance to function in civilized space. Come." The humans followed Neri through wide corridors filled with aliens of various shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human except for their coloring or proportions. Others were so different that June could barely tell which end was the front. All of them stared at the humans with obvious curiosity. They reached a large circular room with a central holographic display showing the station's layout. Neri waved her hand, and the image zoomed to a small section marked in red. "These will be your quarters," she said, "limited to this section until your species proves itself non-disruptive. The station uses standard Confederacy time divisions. You have been assigned learning terminals in your quarters. The basics of station function should be simple enough for even human minds to grasp." Ambassador Lee maintained her diplomatic smile. "We appreciate your guidance." Neri turned to June again, poking his shoulder this time. "The specimen will report to the biology center after rest cycle. We are quite interested in human adaptive capabilities." She poked him again, harder, "though they appear limited." June stepped back slightly. "I'd be happy to discuss human adaptability. That's my specialty." Neri made a sound like bells tinkling, apparently a laugh. "Discuss. No, you will be examined. Your species' inclusion in the Confederacy depends on thorough understanding of your biological capabilities. She poked his forehead this time. We must determine if you are worth the effort of uplifting. The other humans tensed at this, but Ambassador Lee gave them another warning look. After Nari left, the humans were shown to their quarters by a smaller heron who introduced himself as Jin. He seemed friendlier than Nari, or at least less openly condescending. Please excuse Senior Officer Nari's manner, Jin said quietly. She follows old traditions regarding new species integration. Is poking people part of that tradition? Jun asked, rubbing his chest where Nari had jabbed him. Jin's eyes widened slightly. You refer to the dominance gesture. Yes, among the heron, physical contact establishes social hierarchy. As newcomers, you are at the bottom of the station's social scale. So everyone's going to poke us? Asked Dr. Yoon, the team's physicist. Oh no, Jin said. Only your assigned supervisors would have that right. It's considered. I believe your word is crude to establish dominance over those not in your direct authority chain. Jun frowned. On Earth, poking someone like that would be considered rude. Interesting, Jin said, seeming genuinely curious. Our briefings suggested humans use similar physical dominance displays. Perhaps there was a translation error. He made some notes on his tablet. I will update the cultural database. After Jin left, Jun explored his assigned quarters. The room was larger than he expected, with strange curved furniture that seemed designed for bodies somewhat different from human ones. A terminal on the wall lit up as he approached it. Human occupant detected, said a smooth voice. Welcome, Specimen JK01. Your orientation materials are available for review. My name is Jun Kim, he corrected. Noted, Specimen JK01. The computer replied, not changing its address. Sighing, Jun sat down and began reviewing the orientation materials. Most of it was basic information about the station, how to use the food dispensers, where emergency supplies were located, and rules about which areas humans could access. At the end was a personal message from Nari. Specimen JK01. Report to Biology Center 5 at start of next cycle. Come alone. Bring no equipment. Your cooperation will reflect on your entire species evaluation. Jun frowned at the message. He'd expected to be working alongside alien scientists, sharing knowledge as equals. This sounded more like he was going to be a test subject. He tried to sleep, but the slightly higher gravity of the station made his body feel heavy, and his mind kept racing with questions. What if humanity wasn't considered worthy of joining the Confederacy? What if the heron's friendly approach was just a way to study humans before deciding their fate? When Jun finally did sleep, he dreamed of being in a zoo cage, while blue-fingered aliens poked him through the bars. The biology center turned out to be a large laboratory complex. Nari was waiting for him, along with 3 other heron scientists. The specimen arrives, Nari announced, poking Jun's arm in greeting. Remove your outer coverings. We begin physical assessment. Excuse me, Jun asked, surprised. Your clothing, Nari said slowly, as if speaking to a child. Remove it for examination. Jun crossed his arms. I'd prefer to keep my clothes on, thank you. I'm happy to discuss human biology and show you our research data. Nari poked him hard in the chest, cutting him off. This is not a request, Specimen. Your ambassador has approved all examinations. Your species status depends on complete compliance. One of the other scientists stepped forward. Perhaps the specimen requires demonstration of procedure safety. He pulled up a holographic display showing detailed scans of what looked like human anatomy. With a shock, Jun realized they had already examined other humans. Who are these scans of? Previous short-term human visitors, Nari said dismissively. Their data is incomplete. You will provide better samples. For the next several hours, Jun endured a series of increasingly uncomfortable examinations. The heron scientists took samples of his hair, skin, and blood. They measured his strength, reflexes, and sensory responses. Throughout it all, Nari continued her habit of poking him whenever she wanted his attention, or when she was explaining something she considered obvious. By the end, Jun's patience was wearing thin. "Is the poking really necessary?" he finally asked as Nari jabbed his shoulder for what felt like the 20th time. Nari's eyes narrowed. The specimen objects to standard dominance signaling. "I have a name," Jun said. "And yes, humans generally don't like being poked repeatedly." The heron scientists exchanged looks. Nari made the tinkling laugh sound again. "Noted," she said, poking him one more time. "Humans display primitive territorial responses to dominance gestures." Fascinating. As Jun left the biology center, he felt less like a diplomatic representative and more like a laboratory animal. He filed a formal complaint with Ambassador Lee, who promised to address it through proper channels. But the next day, when Nari greeted him with another poke and called him the less disagreeable specimen, Jun realized that in the Heron Confederacy, humans had a long way to go before they would be seen as equals. 3 months passed on the space station. Jun now knew his way around the human section and several other areas where they were allowed to go. He had learned some basic words in the Heron language and could recognize at least 6 other alien species by sight. But one thing hadn't changed: Nari's treatment of him. If anything, it had gotten worse. She no longer just poked him during their work sessions. Now she did it in public places, in front of other aliens. She would see him in the food hall and walk over just to poke his head and say something about the specimen's eating habits. Jun tried to stay calm. Ambassador Lee kept telling all of them that these were important diplomatic relations. "We can't risk offending them," she said during their weekly meeting. "Earth needs this alliance." "But they're offending us constantly," Dr. Yoon pointed out. "Especially Jun. Those pokes look painful." "I've filed 3 official complaints," Jun said. No response. Ambassador Lee sighed. "I've been told that Nari is from a powerful family, and the Heron don't see poking as offensive. It's just their way of establishing social order." "That doesn't make it right," Jun said. "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "But we're the newcomers here. We have to adapt." After the meeting, Jun went to the station's library. It was one of the few places Nari rarely visited. He had discovered that the database contained information about all known species in the Confederacy, including biological and cultural data. For weeks now, he had been studying everything he could find about the heron. "Computer, show me heron evolutionary history," he said. The screen filled with images of early heron ancestors. They looked different from modern heron, smaller with protective shells on their backs. Heron evolved on a world with low predator pressure, the computer explained. Their primary threats were environmental: storms, floods, and temperature fluctuations. Jun leaned forward. This was new information. "So they didn't evolve with natural predators." "Correct. The heron homeworld had no apex predators that hunted proto-heron. Their species developed in social groups that competed for resources through displays of dominance rather than physical combat." This explained a lot. On Earth, most social mammals had evolved with both predator and prey relationships. Humans had been both hunter and hunted during their evolution. It shaped how they saw the world, how they responded to threats. "Computer, how do heron respond to predator species?" Heron have no natural defense against predator behavior patterns. When first encountering predator species during early space exploration, many heron were injured or killed due to failure to recognize predatory intent. Modern heron are educated about predator species, but may still lack instinctive responses. Jun thought about this for a long time. The heron had never evolved to recognize the signs of a predator about to strike. Their poking behavior was annoying to humans because humans had evolved with the understanding that poking, prodding, or threatening could lead to a predatory response. The next day, Jun had to give a presentation about human adaptability to an audience of scientists from different species. He had worked hard on his slides and practiced his speech. This was important, a chance to show that humans had valuable knowledge to share. He was just setting up when Nari walked in with 3 other high-ranking heron. "The specimen prepares to educate us," she announced loudly. "How amusing." June ignored her and continued setting up. The room filled with aliens of various shapes and sizes. Some floated in special tanks, others needed breathing masks. It was the largest gathering June had been part of since arriving. He began his presentation. "Humans evolved on a planet with extreme environmental variation," he explained. "From deserts to ice caps, from sea level to high mountains. This forced us to adapt not just biologically, but culturally and—" Poke. Nari's finger jabbed into his shoulder from behind. "Speak up, specimen. Some species cannot hear your weak human voice." June cleared his throat and continued, raising his voice slightly. "As I was saying, humans had to develop flexible problem-solving abilities to poke. Harder this time, right between his shoulder blades. The specimen should use simpler terms," Nari announced to the room. "Many present may not understand advanced concepts." Several aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. June felt his face grow hot, but he kept going. "Human adaptability can be seen in our ability to live in nearly any environment on our planet. From the coldest—" Poke. This time on the back of his neck. June flinched. "The specimen claims environmental adaptability, yet requires specific temperature and oxygen ranges to survive," Nari said. "Note its reaction to simple dominance gesturing." More alien laughter. June tried to focus on his presentation, but Nari kept interrupting. She would poke him, make a dismissive comment, then poke him again. By the time he finished, his shoulders were sore from all the jabbing, and the audience seemed more entertained by Nari's comments than interested in his research. As the aliens filed out, one small green creature with multiple eyes approached him. "Fascinating information, human June," it said in a whispery voice. "I would like to discuss further." June smiled, grateful for some positive feedback. "Thank you. I'd be happy to." Nari appeared between them, poking June's chest hard. "The specimen is not authorized for private consultations," she told the green alien. "All information requests must go through proper channels." After the green alien left, June turned to Nari. "That was unnecessary. We're supposed to be building relationships with other species. The specimen thinks it understands diplomatic protocol." Nari made her tinkling laugh sound. "Humans are not ready for unsupervised contact. Your presentation proved this." "My presentation was fine until you kept interrupting and poking me," Jun said, struggling to keep his voice even. Nari's silver eyes narrowed. "The specimen objects to standard dominance signaling." Again, she poked him in the chest, harder than before. "Perhaps the human requires another lesson in station hierarchy." She turned and walked away, leaving June rubbing his chest where a bruise was already forming. That evening, June couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the presentation and how Nari had humiliated him in front of so many important aliens. His research into heron biology suggested they had never developed the concept of restraint that came from predator-prey dynamics. Their dominance displays were all show, with no real threat behind them, because in their evolution, there had never been a need to back up a threat with action. Humans were different. They had evolved as both predator and prey. They understood the difference between a display and a real threat. They had learned when to show restraint and when not to. The next morning, Jun received a message that made his stomach sink. Nari had published a paper called Primitive Responses: Human Emotional Instability in Structured Social Environments. She had used his reactions to her poking as her primary evidence. Even worse, Ambassador Lee informed him that Nari had been appointed to lead a new committee on integration of pre-spaceflight species. This meant her authority over the human delegation had increased. "I'm sorry, Jun," Ambassador Lee said. "The Heron government specifically requested that she continue working with you. They find her reports on human behavior very informative. She's using me to advance her career, Jun said, making humans look primitive and emotional so she can be the expert on handling us. Ambassador Lee couldn't deny it. Just try to stay professional. This alliance is too important. Later that week, Jun discovered something else. The station was planning a major multi-species conference. Representatives from 12 species would attend, including several who were considering Earth for trade agreements. Nari had been assigned as the human delegation's official presenter. In her proposal, which June found in the public database, she described her presentation. Demonstration of human responses to standard dominance protocols. A case study in managing primitive species integration. June stared at the screen for a long time. She was planning to poke and prod him in front of the most important gathering yet, to show off how humans could be controlled and manipulated. Something cold and calm settled in his chest. The feeling reminded him of camping in the mountains back on Earth, when he'd once encountered a mountain lion on a trail. He hadn't run. He hadn't shown fear. He had stood his ground, made himself look bigger, and stared back at the predator until it decided he wasn't worth the trouble. Perhaps it was time to show Neri that humans weren't just emotional primitives who could be poked and prodded without consequence. Perhaps it was time to remind her that on Earth, creatures who poked predators often lost their fingers. The day of the multi-species conference arrived. The station's main hall had been decorated with flags and symbols from all 12 attending species. Floating lights changed colors to match the mood of the speakers. The room was packed with aliens of all shapes and sizes. June stood at the back, watching as various presentations began. Ambassador Lee had tried to get him excused from Mary's demonstration, but her request was denied. "Just stay calm," she told June before taking her seat with the other human delegates. "Whatever she does, don't react. We need these trade deals." June nodded, but inside, he felt that cold, calculating feeling growing stronger. He had spent the last 3 days researching heron biology even more deeply. He now understood their physical weaknesses, their pressure points, and most importantly, their psychology. Heron had never evolved the fear response that Earth creatures had. They literally didn't understand what it meant to be hunted, to be prey. Their society was built on displays without real threat. They poked and prodded because, in their evolution, no creature had ever bitten back. Halfway through the conference, it was Neri's turn to speak. She stood tall at the center of the room, her blue skin shimmering under the lights. Her silver markings seemed extra polished for the occasion. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying through the hall. "Today I present findings on the integration of pre-spaceflight species into the Confederacy, specifically focusing on humans." She gestured toward the back of the room. "Specimen JK-01, please join me for demonstration." June walked slowly to the front. He could feel all eyes on him. Compound eyes, single eyes, sensory organs he couldn't even name. The representatives from 12 species watched with interest. "Humans represent an unusual case study," Neri continued as June took his place beside her. "Despite primitive technology, they show some promise in adaptability. However, their emotional responses remain underdeveloped." She turned to June with that familiar superior look. "For example, observe the human response to standard dominance signaling." Without warning, she poked June hard in the chest. "Note the change in skin coloration, the tensing of muscles." The audience murmured as June remained perfectly still, his face expressionless. Neri seemed surprised by his lack of reaction. She poked him again, harder. The specimen usually displays more obvious emotional responses. June simply looked at her, saying nothing. Neri's silver eyes narrowed slightly. She continued her presentation, describing humans as fascinating primitives with delusions of galactic importance. While humans believe themselves to be advanced, they are merely at the beginning of their development. Their emotional reactions to simple dominance gestures demonstrate this clearly. She moved closer to June, her finger raised to poke him again. For instance, when faced with direct dominance signals, the human specimen typically. "My name is Jum Kim," he said quietly, interrupting her. "Not specimen." The room went silent. No one interrupted a senior Heron officer during a presentation. Neri stared at him in shock, then quickly recovered. "As you can see, the specimen demonstrates the emotional instability typical of its species." She poked him again, this time in the shoulder. Interruption of superiors is a common human failing. June looked directly at the assembled aliens. "I've been on this station for over 3 months studying Heron culture. I've filed multiple formal complaints about this treatment. Each has been ignored." Nari's face darkened to a deeper blue. Anger, Jun had learned. "The specimen will cease speaking." She poked him again, harder, in the chest. Jun didn't flinch. In human culture, repeatedly poking someone is considered a threat. A challenge. "We have asked for this to stop through proper channels." The alien representatives were watching with great interest now. Some were whispering to each other. This was not how the demonstration was supposed to go. Nari turned to the audience. "You see, humans interpret simple dominance displays as threats because they lack the social sophistication to understand." "We understand perfectly," Jun said. "We simply have different expectations about what follows a threat." Nari made an angry sound and turned back to him. "You will be silent." She raised her hand, and for the first time, poked Jun directly in the throat. Something changed in Jun's eyes. The cold, calculating look was replaced by something older, something primal. Ambassador Lee saw it from her seat and half rose, sensing what was about to happen. But it was too late. Quick as lightning, Jun's hand shot up and grabbed Nari's extended finger. The move was so fast that most of the aliens didn't even see it happen. One moment Nari was poking Jun's throat, the next her finger was caught in his grip. Nari tried to pull away, but Jun held firm. His expression was completely calm as he slowly raised her captured finger to his mouth. The room was utterly silent. Even the floating lights seemed to pause. With deliberate slowness, Jun opened his mouth, revealing his teeth, those strange, omnivore teeth that were so different from Heron's flat, grinding ones. He placed Nari's finger between his teeth and applied just enough pressure to be felt, but not enough to break skin. Nari froze completely. Her pupils widened to full circles, the Heron equivalent of extreme shock. For perhaps the first time in her life, she felt what prey feels when caught by a predator. Her body recognized the danger even if her mind had no evolutionary framework for it. Across the room, Ambassador Lee closed her eyes in defeat. Years of careful diplomacy, ruined in an instant. But something unexpected was happening. The alien representatives weren't shouting in outrage. They were watching with intense interest. Some were even recording the scene. Jun held Nari's finger between his teeth for 5 long seconds, just long enough to make his point. Then he carefully released it and stepped back. "In human culture," he said quietly, still looking directly at Nari, "this is called a boundary. I suggest you respect it." Nari clutched her finger to her chest, her silver eyes wide with a new emotion. Fear. She looked at Jun as if seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. The room erupted in a cacophony of alien voices. Some were clearly alarmed, others seemed excited, and a few were doing what sounded like the alien equivalent of applauding. The small green alien with multiple eyes that had approached Jun after his presentation weeks ago floated forward. It spoke in that whispery voice, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Fascinating. The human demonstrated restrained predatory response. Note how no damage was inflicted despite clear capability. This suggests highly evolved social control mechanisms. A large, rocky-looking alien rumbled in agreement. Most predator species would have removed the digit entirely. The human showed both warning and mercy. More aliens began commenting, their translators working overtime as they discussed what they had just witnessed. Words like predator signals, restraint indicators, and dominance recalibration filled the air. Ambassador Lee hurried to the front of the room, preparing for damage control. But when she reached June, she paused. The alien representatives weren't treating this as a diplomatic incident. They were treating it as a fascinating cultural exchange. Neri remained frozen in place, still holding her finger. The other heron in the room looked equally shocked. In their entire evolutionary history, no species had ever responded to their dominance gestures with a predatory counter-display. The rocky alien approached June. "Your species evolved as both predator and prey," it asked. June nodded. "Yes. On Earth, most species are either hunter or hunted, often both." "This explains much," the alien said. "Your restraint is impressive. My people will be very interested in learning more about humans." As the conference dissolved into excited discussions, with aliens crowding around June to ask questions, Ambassador Lee pulled him aside. "What have you done?" she whispered, though she didn't sound as angry as he expected. "Established a boundary," June replied. "I think they respect that more than they respected our complaints." Looking around at the aliens now viewing the human delegation with new interest, even respect, Ambassador Lee had to admit he might be right. At the edge of the room, Neri was being led away by other heron. She looked back once at June, her silver eyes still wide with that new understanding. Humans weren't just tool users with primitive technology. They were predators who chose restraint, and that, to many species in the room, was far more impressive than any advanced technology. The day after the conference, everything changed. The human delegation's living area was upgraded to a larger section with better views of space. Their access to the station was expanded to include areas that had been off-limits before. Most surprisingly, aliens from various species began approaching them to talk, no longer avoiding eye contact or hurrying past. June sat in the new human common room, staring out at the stars, when Ambassador Lee entered. "The Heron High Council wants to see you," she said. June turned, worried. "Am I being sent home?" To his surprise, Ambassador Lee smiled. "No, quite the opposite. They want to formally apologize for Mary's behavior and discuss a new role for you." "A new role?" "Apparently, your little demonstration has created quite a stir among the Confederacy species. 3 different trade delegations have approached us since yesterday. They're calling it the bite that changed everything." June winced. "I didn't actually bite her. They know that. That's what impressed them." She handed him a tablet. "The Heron have assigned a new liaison officer for you. His name is Ta. He's waiting to escort you to the council meeting." Ta was waiting outside. He was shorter than Nari, with lighter blue skin and fewer silver markings. He bowed deeply when he saw June. "Specialist Kim," he said, using June's actual name and title. "It is an honor to meet you. I will be your new cultural exchange facilitator." As they walked through the station, June noticed something strange. Aliens moved aside for them, giving them space. Some even nodded respectfully. "They're treating us differently," June said. Ta nodded. "Your display of controlled predatory response has created a new understanding of humans among the Confederacy species. Many find it fascinating that a species can possess such restraint." The Heron High Council chamber was a large circular room with raised seats arranged in tiers. 12 elder heron with elaborate silver markings sat in the highest tier. They watched silently as June entered. The eldest heron, whose silver markings covered most of his blue face, spoke first. "Specialist June Kim of Earth, we extend our formal apology for the inappropriate behavior of Senior Cultural Officer Neri. Her actions did not represent the true spirit of Confederacy cultural exchange protocols." June bowed slightly. "I accept your apology. We would like to understand your species better," the elder continued. "Our previous assessments were incomplete." For the next hour, the council asked June questions about human history, culture, and biology. They seemed particularly interested in Earth's predator-prey dynamics and how they shaped human evolution. So your species evolved both fleeing from predators and hunting as predators? One council member asked. Yes, June explained. For most of our history, humans were both hunter and hunted. We had to develop awareness of when to fight and when to run, when to show strength and when to show restraint. The elder nodded thoughtfully. This explains much. The heron evolved without natural predators. Our dominance displays never needed to be backed by actual force, as no creature in our evolutionary history would respond with predatory action. That's why Nari didn't understand why poking me was inappropriate, Jun said. She never evolved the instinct that poking a potential predator might be dangerous. Precisely, the elder said. We have much to learn from each other. Which brings us to our proposal. The council wanted to create a new position, Human Confederacy Adaptation Specialist. June would work directly with representatives from multiple species, helping them understand humans better and helping humans integrate into the larger galactic community. We believe your unique perspective will be valuable, the elder said. Your demonstration of controlled predatory response has created significant interest in human psychology and culture. After the meeting, Todd walked June back to the human section. You have created a new path for your species, he said. Many now see humans as worthy allies, not just primitive newcomers. All because I almost bit someone's finger, Jun said, shaking his head. No, Ta corrected. All because you showed you could have bitten it, but chose not to. The restraint was what impressed everyone. The next few weeks were busy. Jun's new position kept him working with aliens from across the Confederacy. He helped create educational materials about human culture and worked with the station's designers to make spaces more comfortable for humans. Trade negotiations between Earth and 4 alien species progressed rapidly. One afternoon, as June was finishing a meeting with the small green alien, whose name, he learned, was impossible to pronounce with human vocal cords, he received a message. Nari wanted to meet with him before her reassignment to a distant outpost. They met in a small observation room overlooking the docking area. Nari looked different, her posture less rigid, her silver eyes less cold. Specialist Kim, she said formally, using his proper title for the first time. I wish to speak with you before my departure. Jun nodded. I'm listening. Nari looked out at the stars for a long moment. I have spent much time reviewing our interactions. I now understand that my behavior was inappropriate by human standards. It would have been inappropriate by heron standards too, if you had understood what you were doing, Jun said. Nari turned to him, surprised. Explain. You were poking a predator, Jun said simply. If you had evolved with predators on your world, you would have instinctively known not to do that. Nari considered this. Yes, our evolutionary history shaped our blind spots. She looked down at her hand, at the finger Jun had placed between his teeth. You could have taken my finger. But I chose not to, Jun finished. Why? She asked. After all I had done, why show restraint? Jun thought about it. Because that's what makes us human. Not our technology or our knowledge, but knowing when to bare our teeth and when to smile instead. Nari made a small sound, almost like a laugh, but softer, more genuine than her usual tinkling. The heron have never needed such restraint. Perhaps that is why we have so much to learn from humans. She hesitated, then slowly extended her hand, not to poke, but with her palm flat in what June recognized as a heron gesture of respect between equals. I have been assigned to study predator-prey dynamics on other worlds, she said. My experience with you will inform my research. June accepted the gesture, placing his palm against hers. Good luck with your studies. As Nari left for her new assignment, June reflected on how much had changed because of one small action. Human Confederacy relations had been reset. Earth was now seen not as a primitive world to be pitied, but as the home of a species with unique strengths and perspectives. The next day, a new group of human diplomats and scientists arrived at the station. As the senior human representative, Jun was there to greet them. Among them was Dr. Han, a xenobiologist specializing in alien psychology. "I've heard about what happened with the Heron officer," Dr. Han said as June showed her around. "Word has spread all the way back to Earth. They're calling it a turning point in alien relations." June shrugged. "I just established a boundary." "Well, it worked. 3 more alien species have requested trade discussions with Earth. They seem especially interested in our art and literature." "Our art?" June was surprised. Dr. Han nodded. "Apparently, our history of predator-prey dynamics gives our stories a tension and complexity that many alien cultures find fascinating. They want to understand how we think." Over the next few months, the human section of the station grew as more people arrived from Earth. June continued his work, helping both humans and aliens understand each other better. His research on comparative evolutionary psychology became required reading for all species in the Confederacy dealing with humans. The story of the human who bit back. Though June continually reminded everyone he hadn't actually bitten Nari, became part of station folklore. New alien arrivals were carefully briefed on human customs and warned not to poke or prod their human colleagues. 1 year after the incident, June received a message from Mary. Attached was her latest research paper, Predatory Restraint as Advanced Social Evolution, Lessons from Human Integration into the Confederacy. The final line of her paper read, "Perhaps true advancement is not measured by technological achievement, but by the wisdom to know when to show strength and when to show restraint. In this, humans may be among the most advanced species we have encountered." June smiled as he closed the message. From specimen to respected colleague, from primitive to advanced, all because he had shown that humans understood something the heron had never needed to learn. Sometimes the most powerful message isn't the bite itself, but the decision not to bite when you could. The arrogant alien who kept poking the human had learned an important lesson about dominance. Sometimes it's not about who has the most advanced technology, but who has the sharpest teeth and the wisdom to use them only when necessary.